Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie One Ranger. Now, this film is going to be released this week on May 5th in select theaters and also on VOD as well. And this is a film that's also written and directed by Jesse V. Johnson, who's become one of my favorite directors in the last couple of years. I think he's a truly underrated director and writer as well, too. And anything that he is doing, I'm always anticipating greatness out of it because I think he's really one of those writers and directors out there that I always take away something from his work that I really truly do connect with in virtually every single film that I've come across here, and this one being no different. And this movie also stars one of my favorite actors of all time in Thomas Jane, who I think is so good in this role, which I'll be getting into in a little bit here. But one thing I'm going to point out about this review as I get into this here is that as much as I did enjoy the film, and I really did enjoy the movie here, but there's a lot more to this film that I actually took away from that I honestly didn't really anticipate too much from as far as what I was expecting out of this movie. And then when I had saw the film, a lot of the things that I've learned about Jesse, about his upbringing, about his love for American culture, American cinema, his Irish background as well too, it's all infused into this movie where it's a lot of Jesse's personality that I get to see in this film. Now, and that's not to say that you don't see that in his other work, I should say. You definitely do, but for some reason, in this particular film, there's something distinct about this movie that I picked up from Jesse specifically about his upbringing that I distinctly remember, which I'll talk about in this review here. But I will not be getting into any spoilers here at all for this movie, but I will obviously get into the plot synopsis, my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. A gunslinging Texas Ranger tracks a bank robber across the desert, only to discover he's an international terrorist set on detonating a bomb in the heart of London. When the lawman partner is killed, he's drawn into partnership with a British intelligence agent and her boss to bring the outlaw to justice, dead or alive. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this movie is actually with Thomas Jane. I said before that Thomas Jane is one of my favorite actors of all time. I think the guy does a really good job when it comes to his performance in virtually every single film and TV show that I've come across him in. I think he just does a really good job in getting the best out of the characters he's portraying in these respective roles. And this film is no different when it comes to that because I actually come to learn and find out with my conversation with the writer director of the film and Jesse V. Johnson, what I'll be talking about a little bit here, that when it came to the preparation for this character, that, I mean, apart from the fact that him and Thomas Jane and Jesse had talked together at great length about the character, their ideas of the character, and so on and so forth. Once it came to the production, he was already in character for basically by putting on the accent that he has on the film, and to the point where when Jesse had walked into his trailer to expect a conversation to kind of go over to the day, if you will, Tom was like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Oh, I thought, I guess he was under the impression he was able to talk with him." He's like, "Don't need you here. I got this all figured out." So to the point where Jesse even said that out of all the actors he ever worked with, Tom was a guy that he has had the least interaction with everybody, and as far as the actors are concerned, because he was already figured out what he needed to do, and he was at a position where he felt like if this is what he needs to do to get the best out of this character, to get the best performance, to make the film turn out really well, then by all means do what you got to do, and gave obviously the chance for Thomas to really just do his thing. And I'm actually glad he did that because with what we got in this film, I think turned out quite phenomenal when it comes to his performance here. But one other thing I also want to point out about the character of Tyree that Tom plays in this film is that what you see is what you get. There is no ulterior motive about the guy, and it's basically he's really a good guy who follows things by the book, and he's not willing to make any wiggle room for anybody out there when it comes to the consequences they have to face. Now, he's certainly a person that understands the situation. In a lot of ways, you come to find out he's a guy who's really good at reading people and reading situations. And then when he realizes he's done wrong as far as like mistakes he's made, he's a guy who clearly learns from his mistakes and makes sure not to repeat those said mistakes again. And even though it's not an uncommon trait that we've seen before on film, but just the way that I think Tom has been able to portray that with his character and actually do that justice as far as the character's arc, if you will, even though I don't think there's really much of an arc for the character because, again, what you see is what you get. But it's more about the relationship he's developing along the way, in this case with his partner that the actress, I meant to say Dominique Tipper plays in this movie, who plays the British intelligence agent, that there's something about that partnership that you start to see how they starts to develop along the way, that you realize that the arc for him is just having to reconnect with somebody again in this partnership capacity, where you can see some hesitation for sure, but the trust is earned along the way, where certain things starts to build up that when it comes together, especially towards the end of the film, it makes a lot of sense, and it's a very well-earned relationship at the end of the day. And I also got to give a lot of props to Dominique Tipper, who again plays his partner in this movie. There's something about her character that I found quite interesting. I had learned about in the behind the scenes making this film that and when you look at the character, I'm sure a lot of people here in America may not notice the style of clothing that she's wearing, but since I'm more familiar with the British culture in that sense, I knew right away when I saw the type of clothes that she was wearing in the film that she's wearing more or less a skinhead attire, which in England, in the beginning, it didn't seem like it wasn't like a racism style of clothing where people who consider themselves skinheads weren't necessarily racist. It was that way later on, which is a whole different story in itself. But the fact that you have a person of color more or less putting on these skinhead type clothing, I thought that was actually quite a unique aspect of the character, which is an idea that Dominic had that she wanted to use for this character, and Jesse was all on board for that as well too, because that wasn't the initial idea for this character. I think they were just kind of going more for a straight laced type of British intelligent agent, and she wanted a little bit more flair to it that made the character a little bit more interesting, and adding a little bit more of her backstory as well too that we get to learn along the way in a dialogue that she has with Tom James' character Tyree in the movie. So there's certainly a lot that these two actors do add on to their characters to make them very compelling, very interesting. And I'm hoping that, like it did work for me, to have you invested with their characters and also understand their partnership and how it gets developed throughout the way as the story progresses from here. Now, one other thing I also want to point out too is with regards to the plot in itself. Now, the plot isn't something very interesting. I mean, I'm not going to say interesting. I'm going to say it's not something that we haven't seen before. It's a pretty straightforward plot where we have the bad guy out there who's wanting to cause some chaos and wreak some havoc. So it's pretty straight to the point when it comes to that. But it's also about the complexities about the characters that we're following here, including the villains, where you get to really know who they are as individuals and understand their background a little bit, where you really understand where you see that, what you see is what you get, but there's more to the story that you're starting to understand that makes you realize that there's more humanity behind these characters, despite the fact you may disagree with what their intentions are and how they want to go about it here. And I got to give a lot of props to Jess Liaudin, who is playing the character of Oleg in this movie, who is partnered up with Dean Jagger's character in Declan. There's this actor, Jess, is somebody that I remember seeing from a movie he had done a while back called One Shot, which is a film that stars Scott Adkins. It's a beautifully done film, but there's one sequence in particular that I remember distinctly that stuck out for me, and it actually turned out to be my favorite sequence in the entire film, where Jess plays a very, very bad person, but a very complex guy at the same time. And there's just something about his performance in that sequence that I'm referring to here, where you get to see that this guy is very conflicted in what he's about to do and what he's about to ask someone else to do for him, for this mission, if you will, that I thought he brought a lot of humanity, a lot of those gray areas that we tend to overlook that he brought in that sequence. I thought he had done phenomenally in. At the same time, with this particular character here, although you could look at it as in a sense where he could just be another henchman, and I would say to a point, I can understand why people would perceive that, but there's a lot more to that relationship where you come to find out that Oleg and Declan have a really strong partnership. And even though you don't see how they got started, but you can get the history just based on their interaction with each other, where a lot of other people who have been affiliated with Declan in the past are now starting to run away from where they're doing him one last favor. But after that, they're telling him, we're cutting off ties from here because at this point, we want nothing to do with you. And whereas Oleg, on the other hand, is saying, I'm with you to the end no matter what. So there's a very strong partnership that you see from those two villains here, where you can see where they stand with each other, despite the massive hurdles they have to deal with along the way. Whereas in the other side of the spectrum, where you have the partnership between Agent Smith, played by Dominic Tipper, along with Agent Tyree, or Ranger Tyree, played by Thomas Jane, where they're starting to form that relationship and they're developing that relationship along the way, where you have a partnership on the other side of the spectrum that already have that relationship, and they're going at they're clashing with each other head to head here. So that's actually a really wonderful dichotomy to see in terms of the partnership, how they work out with each other and how they're going to evolve in the story along the way. So really, really wonderful aspect of the film that I really did enjoy. Now, the other thing I want to point out too is with regards to the directing under Jesse Johnson. Now, Jesse, I'm happy to see that he's been getting more opportunities to be able to work on budgets that are a little bit bigger, more time, I would say, and a lot more resources as well too. And it definitely does show here in this film. Now, granted, this isn't a large scale movie, but you can definitely see that the resources that are available in this film, they've used it to full effect here, where there's several locations they're shooting here in the United States, along in England as well too. And they're definitely using the two different landscapes as, in a lot of ways, as characters to show the differences as far as where Ranger Tyree is coming from Texas and being more or less a fish out of water, where he is coming into an area that he is not familiar with at all, but is under the guidance of his partner who knows the London back the scene, if you will, that is showing him the way, and at the same time having to be working together in a very quick capacity where they have to trust each other on short notice here, where they're forced into a situation where they have to work together very, very rapidly. One other thing I want to point out too is with the action sequences. I was actually quite happy with what I got with this movie when it comes to the fight sequences, and especially with the opening of the film, where there's a chase sequence that occurs that I know, I believe, if I recall correctly, is directed by Luc Lafontaine, who served as the second unit action director in this film. I've actually spoke with Luc on my show, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, not too long ago, and I was aware that he was worked on this film as well too. And what I saw with what he's been able to put together when it comes to the action sequences in this film, because all the scenes that he has shot here in the States are in the movie here, I'm actually looking forward to see what he's going to be able to pull off here, if this directing gig that he had talked with me before on my show about will ever come to fruition, because I thought what he had done with what we got seen in this film turned out quite well. So I'm really looking forward to see what he's going to do. So having seen what I got in this film, I did enjoy a great deal. Another thing I want to point out too is with the overall story in itself. As I mentioned before, this is nothing new that we haven't seen before. I mean, it's pretty much a straightforward story. You have the good guys chasing the bad guys, and at the end of the day, the good guys win. But it's always about the setup to the victory at the end, which I thought worked quite well in this movie. But overall, I thought that the way that was all executed to get to that point was a very earned and satisfactory victory, in my opinion. So overall, I did have a lot of fun with this movie. I will say, though, I don't think it's Jesse's best film, but it definitely is a fun movie that offers all those entertainment factors when it comes to rooting for the good guys and getting to know the bad guys and understanding their perspective as well too, when you get to see that there's a lot more complexities behind them, to show a human side to them as well too, where you know that they're not really being good as far as what their intentions are, but there's a likability factor about them, especially with the character of Oleg, that you really can connect with, that when you see how he more or less get what he deserves, if you will. It's a very well-earned victory, but at the same time, there's a part of me that always wondered, what if he could just make the difference in changing his ways, if you will, because there's a goodness about him as well too, which it comes to the loyalty that he has with Declan. So clearly, you can see this is a guy who's very well aware of understand the value of relationship and the importance of loyalty and understanding the task at hand. So there's a goodness about him in that sense, but just going about the wrong way. But overall, I think that the story in itself, the film overall, is just a lot of fun. And I had a great time with it at the end of the day. So for me, that's going to be the end of my positives. Now let's get into my negatives. There are two major gripes of the film, but my first major gripe has to do with the killing of Tyree'S partner in the beginning of the movie. The problem that I had with that was that we understand the motivation for Tyree having to go out and find Declan, the villain in this film, played by Dee Jagger, who I think was great. It was really good in the movie, I should say. I actually liked him a lot in the role of this film. But when it came to what had happened at the beginning of the movie where his partner dies, the part that really that threw me off was the fact that when we find out that his partner dies, Tyree is saying that this is a good man. He was a really good friend of mine. As soon as he said that, right away I had a problem with it, because I figured that if this was so important for him, why was that left out of the film? Because I felt like that was something that we needed to see to really understand and establish that relationship of how close these guys were. Because he was saying, I went to his wedding, and said all these things about knowing him since he was a young guy when he graduated from Ranger School, among other things as well. It was just one of those things where I would have liked to have seen more of that relationship being developed, whether it be for a couple of minutes, but just to have something that we can, have some sort of substance with, other than just that exposition, which I think was a big mistake in having that missing in this movie. Because even though the motivation is there when the British agent Smith had reached out to to Tyree and say, hey, by the way, this is the guy that killed your partner. He's also a terrorist as well too, and he's over in London right now, and you're a good tracker, so we got permission from your agency to come with us to track this guy down. And remember, he's the guy that killed your partner. And so he has that motivation there, but the establishment for that motivation was missing for me personally, which I thought was a big mistake for the film, because I'm sure some people may just be okay with that, but for me personally, having more of that substance in the film would have served better for the overall story. But even though we have the motivation, again, I feel like that was missing a great deal in this movie. The other thing I want to point out too actually has to do with the villain in Declan, played by Dean Jagger. Now, that's not this. When I'm saying that I have a problem with the character, I'm not saying that Dean Jagger was not good in the role. He was actually quite good in the role. Unfortunately for me, I felt like his character was the least interesting out of all the characters in the movie. But the thing is that although we understand where the character is coming from when it comes to more or less what his motivations is, he says in the movie too that he's killed Protestants in the name of the Catholic Church, Buddhists in the name of China. So you can tell this is a guy, from what we've learned early on, that you hire him to do something, he'll do the job. And it seems like at certain points, like he almost believes as far as why he went on through these missions and got paid handsomely for it. So there's a lot more to the character that I felt like was missing, that we could have learned a lot about, especially from that line or that he shared about his more or less his hiring from other organizations to kill various other people along the way too. That to me was really the character that I was most interested in learning about. And you do get to learn more about his background as well too. You can see that this is a guy that has developed a relationship with everybody, but eventually whatever relationship he's developed along the way has been burned along the way as well too, where they want nothing to do with him because he's too much of a loose cannon, and understanding where the concerns for these various organizations that are working with him are telling him, we're done with you at this point. And so after this, don't ever come back to us because we're not going to be associated with you anymore. And I felt like there's a lot more to that story that was missing, that we could have got more out of that character, apart from just the exposition where you could see this is a guy that is going to be on his own, but with the exception of his friend Oleg, who's always there by his side no matter what, which I thought were the reason why the character worked well enough to understand that there is a loyalty to him, but that loyalty elsewhere is not existing anymore. So those were my two biggest gripes of the film. But otherwise, apart from those issues that I had with the film, everything else around the film I thought was strong enough that I still enjoy the film a great deal. It is a fun movie, and I love the Western aspect of the film as well too. Excuse me. And then, I almost forgot to say one thing in my positives here, which I know I'm in my negatives right now, but fuck it. I'm going to say that I also love the score to this movie too, done by Sean Murray, who I think is a wonderful composer. I think that Sean did a really good job when it came to establishing the feel of the film with that Western genre feel that I thought he had done so beautifully in the beginning of the movie, and you also get at the end of the film as well too. I think when it comes to Sean scoring the films, he has a really good understanding of the genre that he's working with here, and trying something a little bit different as well too, to make it just unique for the film as well. So when it comes to the score in this film, I actually enjoyed it quite a great deal, because it definitely does have that Western element to it. And even though the movie's set mostly in England at this point, but you still have a bit of that Western backdrop with the songs the music, I meant to say that Sean is composing here, that I thought worked very effectively here as well too. So you have that dichotomy of the Western music in a British backdrop, which I thought was handled quite beautifully in my opinion. So even though I end this negative on a positive note here, but that's gonna be the end of my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. I really did enjoy this movie. Now, I will be honest and say again that this is not my favorite Jesse V. Johnson film. And as much as I did enjoy this movie, there's still a lot of great qualities about this film that I wanted to point out as well, too, that I forgot to mention in the beginning of this review, that one of the things that I really did take away from this film is that there's a lot of Jesse Johnson's personality in this movie, because when I had come to learn in my conversation with him in the past, and various other conversations he had in the past as well, where he talked about where he grew up in England, that he really enjoyed the American cinema, enjoyed American television, he enjoyed the American culture. And he's also a guy that really likes to learn about the history of various things he comes across here. So when it came to the Western genre, which is a genre he grew up watching as well too, he was really a big fan of that genre with the American culture, as far as the history of cowboys and the Rangers as well too. And he's someone that really does his due diligence in researching about doing the story justice by having the right amount of knowledge that's required to have an effective story, given the history of, in this case, of a Ranger, as far as how effective they are when it comes to tracking gun use and being good at psychology, among other things as well too, and understanding the history of that, which is infused into this narrative as well too. And the thing that, the fact that he's growing up in England as well, and that's where he was born and raised, having to have a ranger come out of the U.S. to go into England, you have that authentic backdrop as well, where he understands that background because he's from there, and then having a authentic point of view for an American who's coming out of the U.S. going into England, because he has studied the culture so thoroughly, and when I'm referring to about the cowboy culture and the ranger culture as well, and understanding that history and understanding the type of men that were more or less taking on these jobs and how difficult these jobs were and how tough these guys were as well too, and understanding the various things they had to do aside from just having to catch the bad guys and take them to jail. There's a lot more to that story that we come to realize when if you look into your research here, what else is involved with that. And that's something that Jesse has done a really good job and established that here by simply getting that perspective of a character when you listen to him talk and hear how he discuss things and how he likes to approach things, and just taking the little nuances about these type of people that we've probably grown up watching, that I think Jeffy has captured quite well through Tyree, portrayed by Thomas Jane, that I think everyone has done a really good job when it comes to that. And at the same time, when it comes to the character of Declan, played by Dean Jagger, the aspect of the Irish culture aside of this story here, where Jesse's grandmother is also Irish as well, and she shared her stories about what she had experienced growing up, and she had a very Irish perspective on things. Like she was Irish through and through, from what he had said to me in a previous conversation we had, which I'll be talking a little bit here. That it seems like a lot of that influence was definitely kind of infused into this narrative as well too. So to me, when I watch this movie, I see a lot of Jesse Johnson in the film, based upon the things that he had grown up watching, the things he has studied, and the background he also has as well too in telling this narrative in the UK, and the various other things that come with it as well that he's infused with this narrative to make a pretty good, fun, exciting, and compelling story at the end of the day. So for me, I say this movie is definitely a raise a glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. Now, as I said before, this movie is going to be coming out this week on May 5th in select theaters and also on VOD. So if you have seen this movie by the time this film drops, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you guys subscribe to the NRW, and make sure you guys share, like our videos, and hit the notification bell while you're down there as well. And also, don't forget to follow us on social media. On NRW, you can follow on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. You can follow me on my social media accounts. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina. On Twitter, You're So Cool with WRM. And also on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And my guest this week, that's going to be dropping this Friday, is the writer and director of the film, Mr. Jesse V. Johnson. Well, we do talk a great length about the movie here as well. And I will also point out too one little error that I made in the beginning of this conversation that I had with him on my episode. I forgot to turn the camera on, so there's gonna be at least the first 9 minutes of the conversation that we had that you're just gonna see a Garfield image here that's gonna be appearing on the screen. So I apologize for the mishap there. I happened to catch it on after the fact. So if you happen to watch the episode and you see that there's a big Garfield image when I'm speaking, it's because I forgot to turn my camera on. So I apologize for that again. But otherwise, make sure you guys be on the lookout for that, and also check out the film. I hope you guys will go out of your ways to rent it, buy it, and I know it's gonna be coming out on Blu-ray really soon as well too. So I highly urge you guys go out of your way to check this film out. Please support these filmmakers out there because they put in a lot of work. And like I said before, I'm a big fan of Jesse V. Johnson's work, and I think he's just gonna keep getting better and better when it comes to his film. So for me, I hope you guys will go out of your way to enjoy the film, because I certainly did. And I hope to hear you guys share your thoughts again in the comment section down below. So that'll be it for my reviews this week. And until next time, everybody, stay safe out there, and cheers.